Good morning. How about if we start for the sake of time and to give everyone the opportunity to use all the time they have for the presentations. So I will now give the floor to Norma Peña and José Luis Acevedo. First, I will give you a couple of announcements. Some of you have asked me about the attendance certificates. The attendance certificates are ready, but we are going to give them to you when you fill out the feedback forms. So you give us your opinion and tell us a little bit about what you think about these 2 days of conferences. So please go outside and ask for a feedback form. Without further ado, I would like to thank Norma Peña, who is a restorer from Belkrim and is an expert in organ restoration and worked in the convent of Matete in the state of Hidalgo. She has been part of Belkrim's coordination office since 2004, and she also participated in the recovery of the organ of Santa Maria Acapulco. Since 2007, she has coordinated restorers teams, and she is also a head restorer at the National Coordination for the Conservation of Cultural Heritage. José Luis Acevedo, in turn, is or majored in photography from the Ibero-American University, and he participated in Dr. Elksing's workshop in Barcelona, and he has also participated in the restoration of both the organ of the Basilica of the Virgin of Guadalupe as well as other organs at an international level. He is currently one of the organ restorers of the National Coordination for the Preservation of the Cultural Heritage. So I will now give the floor to our presenters. Thank you. Good morning. We would like to thank you for inviting us to the symposium, and we are going to share with you our experience in preserving and recovering the organs that were damaged during the 2017 earthquakes.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning.
Antes que nada queremos agradecer a los organizadores de este evento.
First of all, we would like to thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to participate in such a necessary event. So without further ado, we will jump straight into the topic that concerns us today.
Históricos de la dependencia de monumentos a los arquitectos propiamente.
And we would like to call upon architects because we think that we need a stronger link and relationship between conservators and architects. We need a stronger relationship with architects in the aftermath of an earthquake. And in order to build a stronger relationship, we are going to give you some of our ideas, because we think that currently not many people are aware about the importance of organs, and that is why we want to ask a question. Why is an organ important? As you may see, organs come in various shapes and sizes. In Mexico, we have a varied series of organs that have different shapes and sizes. Many of them are unique. And we have even extraordinary examples, like the organ of the Metropolitan Cathedral of Puebla. An organ is a combination of technology and art, like the majority of historical assets. But in the case of an organ, we should stress its technological component. For example, the pipes. Each pipe has a particular technological feature that translates into a sound. And that is why we want to stress the technological features of an organ, because an organ, first and foremost, is a machine, and not a regular machine. It's a machine that creates music, and that has a lot of implications. On the picture in the middle, we may see a keyboard that has an artistic purpose. So the objective of the organ is not only to create music, but to be aesthetically beautiful. We see exactly the same in the picture on the right. One of the most difficult features in an organ is its sound issuing capability. Our world is mostly visual, and most messages are received through our eyes. And sound is not given its due importance because it is more difficult to process, and we are not so used to having a close relationship with sound. So, for example, the main purpose of an organ is to appeal to people's feelings. And this is not something that we are used to do. We work in close relationship with architects because organs require specific acoustics, especially in temples or in churches. And acoustics are essential to an organ. I personally believe that 50% of the value of an organ lies in its sound, as well as its direct relationship with architecture. And that is why we are calling upon architects to collaborate. And the 2017 earthquakes have brought us together in this sense. An organ is a machine that allows us to experiment with sound, and that is why it is so complex and so delicate at the same time. On top of all of this, we are recording, or the organ recovery team is recording what we need to do to care for an organ after an earthquake. And prior to any earthquake, we should have a detailed record about the existing organs. Every organ is different, and that is why we are going to show you a series of pictures about organs. For example, here we see an organ that is embedded in the wall. We see it in the picture in the middle, and that is why we are making such a stronger relationship with architecture, because it wouldn't be possible to install an organ in the middle of a wall if it weren't for proper architectural design. Organs come in various shapes and sizes. For example, in the middle we have a highly luxurious organ that is highly expressive. It is very detailed. And on the right, we see a very modest organ that is small. It is modest in design, but it is not less important. It has exactly the same value as others. And then we have cases such as these. This is a very special organ in terms of its shape. And for example, here we see pipes that are arranged in the shape of a seashell. And we see how technology comes into play again. For example, at the bottom we see a series of trumpets. And these create a very special sound. This is an organ that we are researching into, and we are getting very interesting results. The earthquake changed several things. Even if we had worked in organs in the past, we were forced to address the issues with the organs, and there are four main issues that we need to tackle in order to safeguard organs. First, we need to care for organs that are affected or directly affected by earthquakes. I will give you a series of examples in a minute. Next, we have a situation where organs are affected by the damage to the architectural structure where it lies. So, for example, in this case, an organ is to a certain extent trapped inside a building that is damaged, even though the organ is not damaged. So we needed to care for the building, but we also need to create a specific intervention strategy for the organ. Then we have a third situation where we have a water infiltration resulting from earthquakes. We did have this situation in 2017 because many of the buildings that crumbled down started seeing a lot of water infiltration and a lot of damage to the wooden structure. This translates into the development of fungi or mold, or, for example, if a window breaks. There is also a problem of animals coming into the building, and since these are hazardous structures because of their instability, this gives way to animals nesting inside. These are pictures of the first case where there is direct damage to the organ. So, for example, here the choir collapsed with the organ as well. And these are pictures of what was left from the organ. This is a very well-known case of structural damage. This is the organ of Huaquechula, and the organ was saved just by a little bit. And what happened was that the choir completely collapsed. We have yet another example on the right about the structural damage. And even though the organ was not damaged, the building is definitely in bad shape. Here on the left, you may see all the elements that collapsed. However, the instrument as such did not collapse. Of course, there was a little bit of debris on top of the organ, but that was it. And what I was telling you about animal proliferation, we have, in this case, Cacomixles, a local species that started nesting inside the pipes. So recovering an organ in this condition is really complex. The intervention strategy we developed in 2017 and which we have implemented since then is split into two stages. First of all, immediate recovery actions. So we have an earthquake, there is damage to a building, people are concerned about their cultural heritage and they want to go in and save everything they can and they want to fix things.
hemos identificado
So,
que lo más conveniente es
in
el
this case, the
reconocimiento
most
de los
convenient
daños,
thing
es decir, elaborar unas rutas
is to create a critical path,
por determinadas áreas geográficas y levantar en
a
general
critical path
los
that is
daños para poder
specific
tener un
to
panorama
every
de lo que está
geographical area,
sucediendo en
and
por zonas,
carry
¿no?
out a survey to
Esto se hace
have
en conjunto,
a
es
broad
decir,
perspective
van
about what is
brigadas,
happening or what happened in different
brigadas
places.
de protección civil, que son
This implies that we need to
dependencias
deploy the
locales,
civil protection brigades,
relacionadas con el patrimonio,
cultural heritage protection
y también pues,
brigades,
los custodios legales de los templos, los
as well
sacerdotes,
as the legal
comités,
guardians of
etcétera.
these buildings,
Y
for
en un segundo
example,
momento, ya que
priests.
se tiene un panorama más o menos claro,
And once
digo
we
más o menos
have
porque
a
no es
somewhat clear
fácil,
scenario
no
of what
es una labor
happened, and I'm saying
sencilla,
somewhat clear because this is
entonces
not an
se
easy task,
pueden ver los casos que necesitan más urgencia, que son
then
los
we
graves,
decide which are the
y
most
para atenderlos,
serious
lo que se recomienda
situations.
en primer lugar, pues que existen las condiciones de seguridad, no se pueden atender las cosas.
And in this case, the first thing we need to address is the security of the building. We cannot just go inside a building and put people at risk. This is not recommended at all. And then we need to look for experts in the instruments because these are very distinctive, very special, and very delicate musical instruments. So you need to know how to use them. And this is essential to record what happened to the organ. So if you don't have a broad expertise in this sense, a lot of things will go wrong and a lot of detail will be lost. That is why it is very important to identify all the organ-specific details. Another relevant thing is that the people that are working on stabilizing the building and the legal entities in charge, such as the National Institute of Anthropology, should reach an agreement with the organ restorers. There have been cases where people say, well, you know what, the thing is that the building is going to collapse, as opposed to other entities that say, no, you know what, we can embrace the building and go inside and there won't be a problem. So we need a consensus. We need an agreement between the supervisors as well as the team that is working on site.
Bueno, algo importante es todo el apoyo que hemos tenido de los centros INAH. La manera en que trabajamos definitivamente fue.
The support that the National Institute of Anthropology has given us was key. Here in Mexico City, we worked directly with the National Coordination Office for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage, and we also worked with the field offices of INAH.
Finalmente, con ellos se planificó. Ellos realmente ya tenían un recorrido, que es un poco la metodología que seguimos.
The field offices already had a critical path, which is what we needed, and they had already identified what the problems were in the buildings that organs were in, and they could be any of the 4 issues that I described a couple of minutes ago. Like José Luis said, the first field visit is a tour of the site to get an expert opinion and to find what actions we need to perform. If the situation is highly complex, we will perform as many field visits as necessary. These are pictures of yet more organs. These show the different magnitude of the intervention that we need to perform. And we either needed to intervene just with regards to the organ, or we needed to deal with the recovery of the whole building. For example, here on the left, we see an example of a choir that has been braced. And like we said, we cannot go in and try to intervene to rescue an organ if there aren't proper security measures. It's worth mentioning as well that even if each state had its own intervention protocol, we had to tailor our interventions. This has let us know and learn a lot from the teams working on site. Some important considerations we wanted to reflect upon are the following. When people are going inside, they may be certainly good-willed and they want to go in and get everything they can and straighten everything up. However, in this case, if there are modifications, then the insurance company will not necessarily pay for insurance because the organ has been manipulated. And then we started having complications, and that is why it's so important to take pictures. Insurance companies will often say that the place has been manipulated, which is a little bit of a misleading term, but we needed to be very careful. And this is the main word when we needed to recover an organ or a cultural heritage after a natural disaster. We need to be very careful. So the best is to have the support from civil protection equipment teams as well as the legal guardians of the site and community members, because sometimes information is a little bit twisted, and that's when we start having issues with how the information is shared. And we need to have a very clear contention strategy, because this is not just a place. There were 2,000 sites that were affected, so it was not only a single place that we need to go to. So if we have a very clear and transparent intervention strategy, it's better for everyone. We have always believed that taking down an organ is the last resource. We should not go and try and say, well, you know what, we need to recover the organ by bringing it down, because that implies a lot of effort, bringing it down correctly, packing it correctly. That is very complicated. And why do you want to bring it down if you can just leave it as it is and preserve it as it is? An extreme case of damage is the following. Here we have an organ that is on the verge of the abyss. And in this case, of course, we needed to remove the organ, because otherwise the structural stability would be compromised, and we didn't want that. In this picture, on the right, we see an organ that has been moved to another area within the same structure. So we left enough space for the architects to work on the recovery of the choir that had collapsed, and that's everything we did. We just moved it a little bit to the side. I want to emphasize that if specialists do not participate in the removal of an organ, the result will not be good. Organs may be damaged as well. They are not always well preserved, and this is also a risk factor, and that's why we need specialists. So based on our experience, we created an intervention protocol in the case of earthquake. We
Básicamente, pues son las estrategias
grew
para
the
actuar
protocol
en un
according
inciso
to our
en cuestión, no
experience.
hablamos particularmente, pero consideramos que puede ser
And this protocol is organ specific, but we believe that it can be used for other intervention proposals. Currently, our authorities are reviewing the validity of this protocol to mainstream it. And this is the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Creo que podemos.
Thank you very much. We have a time for a Q&A session. Are there any questions? The microphone will be with you in a minute. Good morning. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question. Many organs, or the majority of them, were not being played anymore. And this is similar to what our colleague from Spain said yesterday about the bells. We need to recover that intangible heritage. And the organ players have died without there being a record about how organs are played. Churches used to have music schools to teach people how to play the organ. However, a lot of community members have migrated looking for a better life. And I believe that anthropologists should participate in the recovering this intangible asset. So that's my comment. Thank you. I absolutely agree with our colleague. And it is true that if people don't know what an engineering masterpiece they have in their hand, they will not get to love it. An organ then becomes either trash or something that you just have there sitting next to a wall. So, something that we try to do when we go and intervene these organs is trying to raise awareness about the value of organs among community members. And this is a major task. But this is also key to preserve these musical instruments. I absolutely agree with what you said. And in this sense, we need to consider that this is not an isolated work that specialists are doing. This is a collective work and which has a collective effect. Even if we need specialists to intervene these organs, organs are embedded in the local culture. Unfortunately, organ music has not the place it used to have among social cultures. And that is why we need to create a need for organ music, which then furthers the restoration and preservation of organs. We also agree that people should learn to play the organ again, but we need to be very careful in how to play it, because the organ is full of subtleties. And like we said, it is not an instrument that can be played in a very easy way, because you need to develop a whole technique in order to create the sounds and the subtleties of an organ, and not everyone is able to do it. For example, in the case of Mexico, we have a series of instruments that are just sitting there. But before making anyone use the instrument, we should make sure that they are experts in playing it, because otherwise you will change the sonority of the sound, and it doesn't matter if they are not virtuous musicians. But they should be aware that you needed to play it in a very specific way in order to preserve its intangible heritage, which is its very particular sound. And that is why this is a very delicate cultural heritage piece. And it is not something that belongs to a handful of people, it belongs to a collective. Some years ago, I was working in the museum of Tepoztlán that focuses on the viceroyal period. And at the viceroyal museum, we saw that most of the damage that is made to the organs is caused by very small pieces of paper. But analyzing these small pieces of paper led the restorers to identify who had created that organ. And it was very interesting to see how even these very small pieces of paper could translate into something so valuable for the records. I have just another comment. There is an organ player in Tepoztlán who is a member of the local community, and he is an expert in playing the organ. I don't really remember his name, but if you call the museum of the viceroyalty, you will certainly get his name, because he knows a lot about viceroyal organs. And he knows how to read all the scores.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for your comments.
La última pregunta, yo sé que
Last
todas
question.
las exposiciones
I know that every presentation is very interesting and they spur a lot of questions in us, but we have time only for an additional question, and if you have even more, please ask them during the coffee break. I will be very brief. Thank you very much for your presentation, because our musical heritage is highly valuable. And I would like to ask something about the participation of the European Union. And like you were saying, Jose Luis, and like our colleague was saying, this is a type of cultural heritage that we only have a handful of experts for. So what do we need to create a team of experts? Because we need restorers, we need architects, and we need additional experts. Thank you. Sorry, so your question is what strategies we needed to train professionals? So, considering that we need an expert organ player and many other experts, what steps should Mexico take to have enough specialists? It would be very interesting to know as well how many experts we have in Mexico. Maybe you have an answer to this question, but how many experts would we need, or what type of experts? Well, I cannot tell you what Mexico should do to create a team of experts. However, one of the most tangible examples of a team that is properly caring for the preservation of organs is the team of organ specialists in the state of Oaxaca.
Esa cuestión que hablábamos, ¿no? De que la cultura en torno al órgano cree una demanda.
However, we are not yet at the point where the importance, the social importance of an organ translates into the creation of a school that teaches how to play and preserve organs. Some experts have even had to go to other countries to go and train because there is not enough specialized training in Mexico. There is definitely a need for professionalization and training, but this is still something that there is not a lot of demand for. And for example, we would definitely need a school of organ players, and perhaps you will have a team of 10 organ players, but what happens to the next generation of organ players? Will they have an opportunity?
Refiriéndonos directamente a lo que estamos planteando nosotros como equipo, como coordinación, les comentamos que se está generando un protocolo.
At the National Coordination Office, we are creating an intervention protocol for organs, and what we want to do as well is to pay 2 types of field visits for different purposes, and this is in fact described in the protocol. The protocol describes what a field expert needs to look at to get the basic information about what is going on with those organs. So this is before a natural disaster. Then we have the creation of a database and then communication with the National Coordination Office to define the critical paths. And that's when we define what actions we need to take. During the creation of the critical path, we define what type of intervention we are going to do. For example, it is different to see or to decide whether you just need a preventive intervention or if you need actual shuttering or if you need removal. And of course, the type of action that you need to take is different depending on these scenarios. So these are some of the things that our protocol is taking into account. The protocol is under review, and when it is ready, it will be published. I have a question. The National Coordination Office for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage is not the one that decides whether a course will be opened or if a major in organ preservation will be opened. This is the responsibility of NCRIM. However, like José Luis said, if there is not a collective interest about this issue, it will not happen. An apology from the interpreter, the participant is not using the mic. Thank you very much for your participation, and for the sake of time, I would like to thank Norma Peña and José Luis Acevedo. A round of applause to them, please. I will now invite Walter Uptmoor from the Mayer Workshop Studio. He studied in the Ludwig Maximilian University of Bayern between 1976 and 1980, and in 1980 he became an expert in the stained glass and formally became an expert in this field in 1982. In 85, he started his studies at the Meyer House. He then became an expert restorer of stained glass. He has participated in multiple courses at the Church of Cologne, as well as in the Westford Institute. He has participated in the recovery of the Cathedral of León in Spain, and he was also part of the expert assessment team for the implementation of a pilot project for the installation of isothermic glass in the Church of Valparaiso, as well as in other projects in Chile. Between 2018 and 2019, he participated in the recovery of stained glass in the Judicature of Santiago de Chile.
Good morning. My subject today is restoration, preservation, and protection of historic heritage in stained glass. I'd like to thank the National Institute for Anthropology and History, the European Union, and all the organizers for the invitation to be part of this important conference. Before delving into the topic, and I'll share with you a brief introduction about the company I work with. I work in the Franz Mayer of Munich. It was founded in 1847. It was an institution of Christian artistic work. The company was initially devoted to sacred projects such as altars, sculptures, and paintings. Mayer's altars are all over the world. For instance, we can find them in the cathedral in Santiago de Chile, and I'm sure that there are many more sculptures that were made by our company. From 1862, Mr. Mayer implemented techniques of glass, and Frank Salvazettel, his son-in-law, was in charge of the work, and since the 80s he created his own institute. These are some pictures of our house in Munich. This is the current building from the 1973 up to date. These are some stained glass workshops, contemporary stained glass together with more modern techniques. This is from the workshop back in the 20th century, from the 19th to the 20th century. Joseph Mayer and his son, during that time, created the institute within one of the most important companies with London-based branches, and they were in Paris in 1869 and in New York from 1888. This is also a reconstruction of a stained glass in Rome in the St. Peter's Cathedral behind the altar. And Franz Mayer Company, we can identify its Munich style worldwide. It has a perfection, it is natural. This is a traditional Munich style stained glass, typical from the Franz Mayer Company of Munich. This is Saint Cecilia, made by Francis William Dixon, an English artist. And they made drawings for the company. This is also in the United States Cathedral, St. Mary, 1909. And there are so many more works, some in Latin America, such as in the St. Maria Cathedral in Puebla, and also the church Nuestra Señora de los Ángeles here in Mexico City between the 1900s and the 1913, and also the Guadalupe Cathedral in 1931 here in Mexico City. We also have the Metropolitan Cathedral in Santiago de Chile, and in Salvador in Santiago de Chile. We also see some works within the Basilica. The Munich style lost importance in Europe, but not abroad. Following the common techniques, the typical techniques, it also adapted to a modern style. Franz Mayer had transferred the company's charge to his sons, and the mosaic workshop was founded, and the production of sacred arts was no longer in production. This is the Second World War and the destruction of most of the company's buildings. This has been one of the worst times in the company's history. In the 1870s, both companies merged, and after the World War, both houses devoted themselves to stained glass production. The production was prioritary in that time. Until the 60s, the company had been part of the economic retrieval after the post-war times. Stained glass production for churches, which were reconstructed in Germany after the war, started, and Mayer expanded in the stained glass world also abroad. For instance, there is a more modern stained glass in a cathedral made by the professor in 1965. From 1965, the company was led by the fourth generation, Gabriel and Conrad Mayer. The works of the new direction in the 70s and 80s has been an effort in order to access new markets and techniques. Being in touch with renowned worldwide artists and architects has allowed the company to have innovative art, giving it a worldwide recognition. In Saudi Arabia, for instance, we work for the Diplomatic Center in 1987, or this is the church in Munich by artist Alexander Chenko. This is also a church in Sweden by Ryan Clark. And this was a work for the Princeton University in the United States in 2015. The company also devotes itself to mosaic production. This is, for instance, for the New York subway by a Brazilian artist. The company is now led by the fifth generation by Michael Mayer, son of Gabriel Mayer. The Munich style, the one that in 19th century had been a feature of the Franz Mayer Company of Munich, represents an important part of the company's philosophy. This is a stained glass for a modern church built in the United States. It also comes from the Gothic style, and it is also made in the 19th century style. This was in 2015. Some other works include reconstructing stained glasses. For instance, this is a stained glass in a castle near Bonn in Germany. It was from the 1890, around that time. And luckily enough, within our archive, we also have pictures of some drawings that were in the stained glasses, which is why we were able to reconstruct those stained glasses panels. Another work we did was reconstructing a stained glass in St. Francis Church in Chile between 2014 and 2015. To the left, you see that a stained glass was on fire. It was destroyed due to it. And we now see to the left the before and to the right the after version of the stained glass reconstructed. These are also images of the stained glasses we had in our archive. Thanks to these drawings, we were able to reconstruct them. So, stained glasses and earthquakes, a monographic study. We, for instance, have the Basilica of El Salvador in Santiago de Chile and the history of the basilica. On May the 2nd, 1864, the Bishop Rafael Valentín Valdivieso signed an order to build the temple of Jesus, and in that time, the German architect Theodor Burckhardt was commended to this project, and they started working on it in 1873. The Salvador Basilica is an important symbol of the 19th century and early 20th century in Chile. In 1978, Pope Pio XI entitled it a basilica, and it became declared a historic monument. Now, the main earthquakes on August 16, 1916, an 8.2 degree magnitude earthquake known as the Paradise earthquake created major damages. The main facade was severely damaged. There were cracks on the walls and arches which weakened the structure. We see the roofing, and it crashed on the main part of the facade, specifically on the buttresses, the flying buttresses. Between 1928 and 1945, Architect Luis Solar was in charge of the facade's renovation of this basilica. It was severely damaged by the 1916 and 1920 earthquake. Mr. Solar had an intervention plan for the whole structure, but his work until 1937 was mainly focused on the northern facade and on the apex. The 1985 earthquake. On Sunday the 3rd, 1985, a new earthquake, 8.0 degrees magnitude, damaged the church. 2 columns of the main nave fell down, and some walls of the east were entirely destroyed together with their stained glasses. The apex arch collapsed, destroying the altar, and several collateral arches also were damaged. In 1985, reparations started, but the conditions started degrading, and the basilica was closed for people in 2004. These are some images of the state of the building after the earthquake. And this is a part of the reconstruction after the 1985 earthquake. This has been reconstructed by using new materials, and also the 2 stained glasses were reconstructed, and the reconstruction made by a local company was not a good work. As you can see, the technique and the quality of the new stained glass does not correspond to the original stained glass. Here is the image of the Christ made by the local company, and this is the original quality stained glass of the 19th century made by our company. The 2010 earthquake. February 27, 2010, an 8.8 earthquake worsened the building's condition. It was unstable structurally. After this earthquake, and due to the authorities' non-interest in this building, there were more damages. Damages are mainly in the nave. A pillar, a nave's pillar, collapsed, and some stained glasses on paintings disappeared. Also, the transept was damaged, and the best preserved areas were the ones modified by architect Solar in 1972. The apex and the altar. In 1985, and the transept was reconstructed, and it was after the 1985 earthquake. We see humidity in the building due to the roofing and the walls layers, as well as the waterproofing technique used. We see it on the walls, the columns, and also on the side walls. Walls were inclined and they had fissures. These images are of the church after the 2010 earthquake. This is a metal-shaped pyramid. In the beginning, if anyone here is working and something falls, then that person is able to go underneath the structure for protection. These are also images from the lost stained glasses. And on this blueprint, we can see the damages made in 1985 on the transept and the 2010 damages. In 2010, 4 stained glasses of the main nave were entirely lost, and in 2017, we were able to rescue a stained glass that was about to collapse.
Las obras de protección.
Now, protection works.
Las obras de protección fueron iniciadas en diciembre del
These
año 2014.
started on December
Después de que
2014
una parte de la iglesia se
after
incendiara
a
con una lluvia
part of the
también
church
sobre los
collapsed
vehículos
due
que
to
estaban
rain and it
aparcados
fell on
al
two
edificio.
parked,
Y,
near parked
los
vehicles
vecinos del sector
next to this
interpusieron
building.
un recurso al Estado
Neighbors
para demoler el templo por obras
demanded the
dañosas
state to
que
demolish
fue-
this
felizmente fue
temple,
rechazado.
and that was rejected.
Su reconstrucción está siendo promovida por la Fundación Basílica del Salvador,
The foundation,
el
El
Arzobispado
Salvador
de
Basilica
Santiago,
and El Santiago
el Ministerio
Archbishop,
de Obras Públicas,
as well as the Public
bajo la
Works
responsabilidad del
Ministry,
arquitecto Lino Pozzi y del
under
constructor
architect
Francisco Prada,
Mossi and
ambos de la
Mr.
empresa
Francisco
también
Prada.
limitada.
They are all in charge
El
of
proyecto
reconstructing
contempla,
this
además de
project.
la restauración, la estabilización
The
estructural
project
del edificio,
consists in
la
restoring
instalación de aisladores
the building
sísmicos
and installing seismic
templo,
towers underneath
con
the
el objetivo
temple.
de protegerlo frente a futuros
The aim
sismos.
is protecting it
Las obras
in the
siguieron
face of
paralizadas a
future
mediados del
earthquakes.
2015,
In the mid
por los altos
2015,
costos,
due to the high
siendo
costs,
reactivadas a
works were
comienzos del año
suspended
2016.
and they were
Después de que el
reactivated early
gobierno
2016
comprometiera
after
fondos
the
para
government
realizar las restauraciones.
provided budget for its restoration.
El proyecto consta total de 3 tareas principales.
There are 3 main works
Antes de poder
on,
empezar con la
included in this
restauración del
project.
interior y del exterior.
It
Primero,
is
una remoción y clasificación de los escombros,
first
una
classifying
estabilización
debris and
temporal
removing it,
inicial,
creating an initial stabilization, and the permanent reinforcement project, aiming at having a safe condition but for earthquakes happenings so that the building can be in function and operation again.
Bueno, la primera parte, los escombros fueron retirados,
Debris
catalogados y
was
guardados en
removed,
sectores
cataloged,
seguros de la
and
iglesia.
well kept
En esta acción
in
también ha sido posible
the church,
rescatar un vitral que se estaba
and a stained glass that was about to fall was able to be recovered.
catalogado y
It was cataloged
documentado.
and documented in the records. It is safeguarded within the church, as you can see on the image.
El proyecto de estabilización mismo consiste
Stabilizing the structure includes a metal structure between the apse and the transept. It is designed to support earthquake.
La estructura está formada por marcos ariostrados de acero.
The structure is made by steel-made frameworks in transversal axis,
De la estructura y el existente.
and the walls of this current structure are embedded to it. 40 micropilots of 24 meters in depth were used in order to resist all seismic movements of contraction.
Aquí unas imágenes durante esta fase de la estabilización temporal del edificio.
These images are part of the temporary stabilization process of the building, and you see polychromed.
Una membrana hidrófuga y respiradora.
It was near a window.
Aquí se ve la instalación de la estructura metálica.
This is the metal structure installation.
Dar la vuelta por esta parte. Y aquí como se está reforzando protegiendo el techo.
This is the roof, the ceiling being reinforced, and columns as well.
Las partes también donde se despegaron los vitrales. Aquí hay
This is
dos
where
vitrales.
stained glasses collapsed. There used to be 2 stained glasses, and
fueron protegidos por ambos lados.
These
con
stained glasses were
policarbonato
protected
tipo
with polycarbon.
Los desafíos de esta obra.
Now, what are these works'
La situación
challenges?
actual es que existen 38 vitrales.
There are 38 stained glasses,
38 vitrales, hay 30
out of
existentes,
which 30
4 vitrales
are
extraviados,
still,
y
we know where
hay
they
4
are
vitrales
located,
con
4
pintura.
are missing,
La superficie de los
and
vitrales
4 have a
existentes son
transparent
408
glass.
metros cuadrados.
The surface of the
La superficie de los
existing
vitrales
stained
extraviados
glasses
son
is 408
62 metros cuadrados.
square meters, and the missing
Total
glasses is
superficie
62 square meters. The total stained glasses surface is 470 square meters, and we have 701 existing panels, 144 missing panels, and the total of stained glasses panels is of 845.
El contenido del programa de conservación y
The
restauración
Preservation and Restoration Program content.
Primero, un estudio histórico y un análisis de los valores de la obra
A
para
historic
determinar las líneas de investigación para un
study
estudio
and
de
a
la obra.
value analysis of the work
La formulación del proyecto de restauración,
is how we start in order to determine the research lines of the study in
los
depth.
criterios de intervención,
Restoration projects are created. We have specific and general goals, intervention criteria, and methodology, and we are aligned with the expert that will work on the building. There is a consultation process between experts. These church stained glasses were also made by our company. We have pictures of these stained glasses, as you can see on the right, and we also kept pictures of in-house stained glasses before they were sent to Chile for their installment. We didn't know why, but stained glasses were installed backwards. As you can see on the drawing, as well as on the picture, the Christ was meant to be on the right, and in the actual stained glass, it is on the opposite side. Now, the inside of the painting had been installed, and it may become a problem for stained glass restoration. These were in the main nave. Conclusions. What are the main challenges that we're facing in this monumental work? Recovering most of the original stained glasses, rebuilding and recreating lost stained glasses in panels, and providing a good protection system for stained glasses in order to protect them from earthquakes. Finally, evaluating an adequate solution for the transept stained glasses replacement. Now, this work may take us up to 15 years, and its preservation may even become permanent. Ideal conditions for us to extend this work's life would be having a workshop within the basilica and hiring adequate insurance services in order to finance its preservation long term. Another stained glass example, these are, it is a stained glass within a building in Mexico City. It is within Nuestra Señora de los Ángeles Sanctuary. It is a temple in the Guerrero neighborhood built in the late 17th century. It was damaged by the earthquake on September 19th, 2017. The dome included 8 stained glasses built between 19 and 1913. It collapsed 5 days after the September earthquake, and stained glasses ended up on the floor. These are images of the dome to the left. That image is before its collapse. We see 3 stained glasses. Luckily enough, the other 5 stained glasses were recovered and placed near to the church site. The building is being studied for stabilization, reconstruction, and restoration purposes. The preservation program for the preservation, conservation, and restoration program should be identical to the program that was just described for the Chile construction. These are images of the post-earthquake stained glasses when they were removed. And this is an intervention that had taken place in 2012. It is not to my knowledge, but a panel collapsed and it was recovered and we were able to install it. Well, a local company installed it, and that is how I got these pictures and where I got them from. We see the metal structure installation. Stained glasses are installed on the outside, and this is an picture from within. On the outside, stained glasses are sustained by a metal structure, and they used putty in order to keep it in its place. Last year, these 3 stained glasses on the inside had a metal structure. As you can see, it fell to the floor. And on this picture, you can see that this structure was installed on the inside. These 3 stained glasses, as is my theory, is that only these had this type of metal structure, and the rest, as we can see on this image, this is another stained glass that didn't share this metal structure on the inside. Therefore, I don't know if studies have already considered this, but I think that these stained glasses that included this metal structure on the inside are the 3 stained glasses on the dome, the 3 that fell from that dome. We need to keep as much as possible. For instance, this is the metal structure of the 3 stained glasses that fell. And in 2018, I was able to visit the church, and I examined some of the stored panels. These are well kept in wooden boxes, as you see on the image. But this is an inadequate packaging for stained glasses transportation. And for a long-term storage, panels should be kept on open boxes, on shelves, as you can see on the middle of the picture. Heat and humidity that may be created in the box is harmful for the preservation of the stained glasses and its painting. On these short research, I can share some other ill practices, such as placing tape on the angel's face. These pieces include painting on the outer part of them,
poner la cinta
So it'd be best to
pegar la
place
cinta en una
tape
parte del vidrio
on
que no hay pintura por el exterior.
a part of the glass that is not painted on the outside.
En esta breve investigación de los paneles fue posible
This
averiguar
panel research allowed us to identify that stained glasses, even though they're in a good state, they have issues caused by previous interventions and due to a poor quality painting and inadequate glasses.
dos piezas
These two parts
que no son piezas originales
are not original
o repiten en esta parte.
as this other part.
Aquí una foto del lado exterior
This picture is of
y examinando la superficie
from
de
the
los
outside.
paneles,
Now,
se puede constatar
after
que
analyzing
el lado
panels,
exterior está en
we
buenas
may verify
condiciones
that
y
the
bien
outside side of it is in good
Pero
conditions
el lado
and clean,
interior se notan
but the
graves problemas
inside
de
is
suciedad,
severely
daños de la
damaged due
pintura.
to dirt
Esta
and
suciedad
painting
puede ser una
damages.
señal de patologías biológicas,
These
como
dirt
microorganismos
may
y hongos.
imply biological illnesses, and there may be even microorganisms.
Una otra razón más para almacenar los paneles en cajas abiertas.
This is one more reason for storing panels in open boxes and not
Por
enclosed
suerte, también
boxes.
tenemos en nuestro archivo fotos de los diseños de los vitrales.
Luckily enough, we also have pictures of the stained glasses design. We can compare them with current stained glasses and reconstruct the ones that were destroyed.
Como un ejemplo para una restauración, conservación, restauración.
For restoration and preservation of a stained glass, I'll share with you pictures of a work made in the stained glass of justice in the court palace in Santiago de Chile. This stained glass is a France Mayer Company stained glass installed between 1907 and 1913. The preservation and restoration work took place between 2018 and 2019. The removal and installment of the stained glass as well as the metal structure was performed by a local company under our overseeing. The preservation of such stained glass took place in our German workshop. In our company, we were also able to find a picture of the original stained glass design, which was tremendously helpful for us to reconstruct some of the stained glasses parts. Work steps. We first need to remove the mesh, and we start documenting in photographs the outside of these, removing stained glasses. This is by means of the most adequate methodology, which includes a hammer and some spatulas, removing panels, and keeping a documentation in records. We take pictures in light and without light from both sides of the panel, and it's also important to make a copy of the original panel size in case a panel is destroyed or is damaged during transportation. Then at least in the record we will have a design in order to reconstruct it. Panels were stored in boxes and transferred to Germany. Its restoration takes place after another photographic session in order to analyze its state after transportation. And a cleaning is done, very simple, just dry cleaning, vacuuming some dust. And to the right you see this is the comparison of a cleaned and non-cleaned panel. An important part of our work is broken glasses replacement. It is always important to document. Whenever we work, we also keep documentation in place. These are other pictures of the works on a light table. This panel was a former intervention. We needed to reconstruct it. To the left, you see the previous interventions made for this work. And thanks to the design, we were able to reconstruct it. Broken glasses, in this case, for a country such as Chile, due to the type of earthquakes they have, we need to gather broken pieces with copper tape. In Germany, we use a glue, but for an earthquake country or a country such as Chile, that would not be possible. This was a deteriorated panel. Now welding, putting only on the outside, since we don't want to damage painting. And also, as usual, we keep record of the works performed, panel by panel. We take pictures of the works performed in the restoration and preservation procedures. Last comes the stained glass installment. And finally, I'd like to share with you how could we protect stained glasses. Heritage stained glasses. And isothermal protection is a stained glass protection system that we have been using in Germany. We have over 70 years of experience using this type of protection. And this is a stained glass protection system that allows isolating panels from external aggressions. It improves its preservation conditions. The stained glass, the original stained glass was placed in this position, but after removing it, it was installed on the inside. And the position where it was previously on, we place another glass. It could be a rolled plate glass, and we leave an open space on the top so that there is some air going in and out. How does it work? This is a closed glass to the exterior. It could be the rolled plate glass. And the stained glass is on the inside of the building. We have a vent chamber so that there is no condensation between the stained glass and the protection glass. What are the advantages? This protection system allows a greater protection against mechanical damages such as harms, hits. It is a good protection against rains and other pollutants. This system allows the stained glass to be on the inside of the building, and condensation is between the other glass, so that the stained glass has the same temperature and it is ventilated by the interior air of the building. These allows for an easier removal of the stained glass as well as the other glass. Preservation and restoration works can be done, and more accurately, And these are some very quick pictures. This is a stained glass example. Could you please wrap up so that we have time for Q&A? This is a church in Santa Maria in Germany. This is from 1890, and this is the image, the exterior side of it, that had a metal structure, and this is a picture of the stained glass after its installment, including the protection glass. And this is the outer picture with the protection glass without a metal mesh. For Mexico, we'd need to research this system in order to know if it would be a good solution. And this type of protection has been done in Germany for a long time. And as I said, for Mexico, we'd need to see if it would be suitable for your country. Since we suffer from no earthquakes in Germany, we'd need to know if this would be a good option for you. We did 2 works in Chile, in Valdivia. This stained glass includes a protection glass, and also in the Sao Paulo in Valparaíso, in the Anglican Church. It includes also this type of a protection system. It is a system that we did with a local company. It was Espacio Transparente, a Chilean company. We have a collaboration agreement with them, and I'd like to conclude with this comment. Thank you for your listening. Thank you. We now have time for only 2 questions. Are there any questions over here? Good morning, thank you. My question is regarding the technique. You have painting on the inside, so I'd like to know what is the binder that you use, and what are the issues that we could see in this type of a painting? Is it about cracks? Does it get a yellow color? For this stained glass, we use colored glasses, and the painting is only for the face and ornaments. And this paint is a mix of glass and oxides in order to give it color. And then we hit it with a 60-degree temperature, so the temperature casts the painting is casted on the glass, and the only issues would be humidity. It could affect the painting, so it would only be a matter of protecting the paint on the inside. This is a paint casted on the glass. One more question, please. Very well. We thank Professor Walter Uptmoor. Thank you for being with us. Now I'll give the floor to Maria Elena Corrado from the Higher Institute for Preservation and Restoration in Italy, and she'll share with us the interdisciplinary approach in risk assessment within restoration projects. Maria Elena is an architect graduated from the La Sapienza University in Rome in 1988, and she specializes in prevention for monuments from that same university in 2001. In 2007, she studied a PhD, making a comparison between renewable energies and cultural cultural heritage. She was awarded with scholarships in the Madrid and Budapest universities. She spent 7 years in an internal society for the Roma municipality, working on urbanism and restoration activities. Since 2010, she is an official architect as part of the Ministry of Cultural Heritage in Turin, and since 2014 in Rome. She is part of the ISCR, and she is the liaison person for risk maps, and there is an interactive platform for monument preservation. She is also a lecturer as part of that same institute, and during the last earthquake at the center of Italy, she was part of the crisis unit, working on several activities in the emergency phase, and she was also in charge of emergency workers in Amatrice city. As part of the Higher Institute for Preservation and Restoration, she has been part of recovery of debris in the destroyed churches in Umbria, and she's currently working in the reconstruction project in San Salvatore Church in INAH. Thank you.
Soy muy feliz de estar aquí.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am highly impressed of all the progress you have made in the past year. To me, it is very important to share our experiences because comparing our cases is very important to me. I hope it is the same for everyone else. This is the second time I have talked about my experience here in Mexico, and I have mostly talked about emergency response. However, today I want to talk about what we need to do in times of peace, or in other words, the time before a natural disaster happens. I think it's important to talk about my institution because my institute creates multidisciplinary teams of experts. This has been particularly important to us in the past year because we have also faced different disasters. And to us, it is very important to conduct research as well as to conducted training to have people that are better trained in terms of cultural preservation. I'm sorry to the translators because my Spanish is not perfect, and I hope that they can understand me all right. This might be a little bit boring, but I just want to show you our organizational chart. We are a small institute, and my area is the one that is focused on research. And we participate with the Institute of Del Catálogo as well as other Florence-based institutes. We also collaborate with the local superintendent's offices. So in sum, what we do is work in coordination with the central offices of any government body that is willing to collaborate with us. This is a directory of the skills that we have within our institute. Here you may see that we don't have any anthropologists, but we do have material experts. And we have a series of laboratories. We have chemists, we have physicists. They are the ones in charge of monitoring the physical structures. And we also have our technical scientific team of archaeologists, architects, and engineers. And then we have the school, the Restorers School that we all teach at, which this school is similar to a university. One of our main ideas is to create our risk map A risk assessment map is only efficient if we have the collaboration of people from various fields. This risk assessment map is also useful for people that are part of many other offices. And here I will not talk about preventive intervention, but the concept of preventive intervention goes back to the 90s, and the purpose of preservers back then was to be able to protect either murals or bells or anything else that was part of their cultural heritage within their own context. The dream of our colleagues back then was to create a strategy, a preventive strategy, to ensure that our cultural assets would be protected efficiently in the case of a natural disaster. And this risk assessment methodology had to take into consideration both the inherent risks of the context as well as those in the surrounding areas. That is how we created our risk assessment map. This map has been completely changed because we have updated the information in the past years. And unfortunately, something has happened with our websites, and currently the information is not up to date, and it is not showing properly. I am sorry about this, but I am certainly willing to explain to you this. This is a geographic information system, or a GIS. GIS allows us to bring together many data sources. It is in fact a data bank, and it is a tool that allows us to analyze risk factors. And we think that this is a superpower within the system because it allows us to compare various data sources as well as different scenarios to see what potential cultural assets are at a potential risk. This is an image of a church we intervened. As you may see, the picture is horrible, and this church collapsed because of the reinforced concrete cover that was installed after the 1979 earthquake. And this is definitely an asset that is damaged, and it is not at risk. What we mean when we say that a cultural asset is at risk, we mean that it is an asset that is facing certain situations that could translate into damage, both material as well as human damage. We understand risk as the result of two factors. First, individual vulnerability, as well as the territorial dangers. These are factors that are mostly analyzed by other specialized entities, for example, the territorial management departments or the water management ones. Our risk assessment map is not completely precise in terms of when a natural disaster could occur, because as we know in the case of earthquakes, we never know when one is going to happen. This is a map that describes both the individual vulnerability as well as the territorial danger that an asset is subject to. In order to have a very clear category for each potential scenario, we have classified them into 300 domains. Vulnerability, like I said, is inherent to the cultural asset as opposed to the territorial danger, which is a contextual factor. And there are three main categories within the domain. So we have the environmental or air-bound danger. We have static and structural threats, as well as anthropogenic threats. Environmental threats are self-explanatory. Static and structural dangers are inherent to the soil. These include avalanches as well as earthquakes. And anthropogenic hazards are related to the economy as well as social factors, as well as other calamities such as war or other dangers that apply to that territory, for example, terrorism. Territorial dangers have a risk component that describes the potential damage that could occur due to external factors, as opposed to the internal vulnerability that refers to the likelihood of an asset being damaged due to its own individual characteristics. When we measure both the individual vulnerability and the territorial danger, then we get a measure for risk. Like a colleague explained yesterday, here is our hotspot in Italy, and here we have a cultural asset that is very old. On the left of this building we have the old nave, and on the right the new nave. So if we measure the territorial dangers and the individual vulnerability of the building, we come up with a very high vulnerability factor, and the risk is the one that we saw at the bottom right. And we needed to identify if a territorial danger or a territorial hazard is something that could cause potential damage. For example, in the case of a desert, there won't necessarily be as many hazards as in other geographical locations. The vulnerability index is a very quick and concise process, or it is obtained through a very quick calculation. And we first start with an on-site survey, then we process the data based on the vulnerability factor, and then we process the data with an algorithm. We are applying this methodology not only to land sites but also to underwater sites. This is an example of a vulnerability index description. And here we need to take into consideration a lot of factors, because, for example, we have certain things such as windows that will not necessarily be present in anthropological, or rather in archaeological sites. So the vulnerability of a site changes according to its physical characteristics. We needed to measure the severity, the extension, as well as the urgency. Of course, we needed to remember that this is a very quick calculation, and if we have an area that is prone to flooding, we can obtain the vulnerability index for all the cultural assets that are vulnerable to flooding, to define what our priorities will be and what assets are at most risk. So this is what our risk assessment map is for. This is an example that we have in our risk assessment map. Unfortunately, this building has only been subjected to structural damage, but not caused by natural disasters. And the wooden structure was subject to the risk assessment. And for example, here we have our registry, These are the 3 values we have assigned to the 3 vulnerability factors, and here is the vulnerability index. For example, there will be times when we are unable to measure these hazards properly, but the more precise we are, the more reliable the vulnerability index will be. These are the elements of our record. Here we are considering the materials, the fact that there is a staircase. And there will be times when, according to our information sheet, we will think that an asset is at very high risk. But we needed to make additional measurements. And for every information sheet, we add a picture to show the status of the asset. This is an image of the measurement. Here we are, the asset is most prone to structural hazards. However, the other 2 hazards are close to 0. Here you may see the values for the architectural vulnerability calculation as well as the archaeological vulnerability index. The architectural vulnerability is relative, so we can give it a value between 0 and infinite, because there are a lot of variables, and we needed to make very specific statistical calculations. So it is very hard to come up with a precise vulnerability index. But what we see is that below 0 and 0, the risk is low. It is intermediate if it is above 0, and between 0 and infinite, it is very high. We have a similar case in the case of archaeological vulnerability. It is high if it is above 5. If it is between 0 and 5, it is medium, and if it is below 0, it is low risk. These are pictures that we have used thanks to technological solutions, and these have allowed us to enhance our information sheets. We have used drones, we have used the sensors, and for example here, when we had very poor visibility about the rocks on the ridge, and given that we could not go very close to the ridge, we used a drone to see that this part of the ridge could create a potential hazard, and it is something that we could have certainly analyzed more in depth if it's necessary. Now, in terms of the vulnerability information sheets, it is important to add maps, because they will also describe what the territorial conditions are and which ones need to be taken into consideration. So here is a map that we are using to measure risk. Here we are using a map to measure the structural, hydrogeological and territorial vulnerability. And this is information that we get from the Vincol-in-Rete system that I will describe in a minute. And according to these maps, we have determined that there are 3,000 sites at very high risk. These have a high potential for landslides. We know that even if we are a small country, we are prone to a lot of natural disasters such as volcanic eruptions. So this is the Vincol-in-Rete website. This one was created in 2012, and this one has its own data bank as well as the data bank from other government sources, and it has also information from the Benito Telati database. And what we are using these data sources for is to cross-check their information and ours, as well as to use a specific registry number to avoid duplicates. What the Benito Telati database does is to process all the information from cultural assets managed by the Italian Ministry of Culture, and the Benito Telati database also considers very particular legal characteristics that the Ministry of Culture takes into consideration to assess both the risk and the implications of intervening a specific cultural asset. We also have to take into consideration that all cultural assets are protected by law, but they don't have a specific decrees or legal orders. This is very difficult to explain because right now I don't want to get into the legal aspects of how Italian regulations work, but the point is that if a bishop or if a mayor want the Ministry of Culture to conduct a research or to conduct a survey on a cultural asset, it needs to be done through a decree. And if it is done this way, their information will be uploaded to the Benito Telati database. However, there is still some freedom about what information is uploaded to the Benito Telati system, depending on whether they're religious or not. Now, I will tell you about our organizational structure and how the different government entities collaborate. At the core, we have the cultural heritage protection entities, and we have the art schools, and we also have other institutions such as the Civil Protection Department, as well as the firefighters or the Earthquake Research Institute. And what we are doing is to bring together as many entities as possible to make our emergency responses as efficient as possible as well. Of course, so we are using Google Maps, and this is a series of pictures from the Vincolin system. These are pictures from this year, and we have seen a considerable increase in the number of movable assets. Currently, we have 2 million movable assets, and our system is being increased not only because we are registering more assets, but because there are duplicates. The system is meant to identify duplicates, but there are times when the system will not be able to identify duplicates on its own, but we are working on making it more precise. An important upgrade was the creation of our app. We created an app so everyone can go and look for information about any asset, and if they don't find an asset on the list, they can go take a picture and send it to us so that we register it. This is something that both civil society and government officials can do. However, government officials do have access to the system, and they can upload it directly. This is not the case of civil society because they cannot go and register a graffiti as a piece of art or as a part of our cultural heritage. So there are things that the system is good for, and there are things that are not working so well. So the registry is very good to keep a public record about our cultural heritage sites. It is good because it provides a very quick support for our intervention strategies, and it gives information about the cultural relevance of our assets. It is also a data pool, and it is very useful for first responders. Of course, this system should be used before an emergency, but in reality, we go to the system mostly when there are emergencies. What we cannot do with this system is to issue certificates. Certificates need to be issued by the local expert in charge, and we need to go to those experts because there may be certain changes, or there may be certain procedures on the way, and we needed to look at those first. Also, the system is not something that replaces our intervention project. This is a data pool, but this is not a guideline to define what type of intervention we need to conduct. This is only a source of information that contributes to an intervention proposal. I will go very briefly into this because I mentioned it yesterday, but when we had the first 2016 earthquake, one of my colleagues was called and placed the cursor on the epicenter and set a radius of 20 kilometers and got a list from all the cultural assets that were in the nearby area. And what he got was that there were 6,725 fixed assets and 70,000 movable assets. And of course, these numbers are lower than the real numbers because our data bank is still limited and is not considering all the assets that we have. This information is only available to government officials because if someone wanted to go and loot a cultural site, they could have access to the list of all the movable assets that that person could retrieve from the inside, and we don't want them. We don't want them to know everything everything that's inside a building. So here is an image of both the movable and the immovable asset list. These are pictures of what could be recovered, and for example, when a church collapses, it's very important to know what to look for inside a whole bunch of debris. The system also considers a crisis response mechanism. And like I said, interdisciplinary teams are very important, and that is why the Ministry of Culture works both with the army, with the police, with the firefighters, with the bishops, with the local authorities, etc. And they have created a very wholesome emergency response protocol. One of the main activities of the officers of MIBACT that are involved in the crisis response is to create a crisis information sheet. These are not like the other records that I told you about. Those are done prior to emergencies. This is a form that is filled out in the case of an emergency to obtain as much information about the situation as possible. We are not in charge of processing these forms, but what we do take a look at is the information sheets of the movable assets that were removed from the location that was damaged. What we often do is to go to a site and remove the movable assets and to register them, but it is very important to keep a very good track of it. So we need to have this form, we need to place it right next to the asset to keep a very good track of what we took away from the place. And this record is essential because there will be times when years will go by without the movable assets going back to their place of origin, but the community will remember that something was there and they expect it to be returned. This is something that we could also use for fixed assets in certain cases. This is the church I told you about that was left for dead, and this is the church that we are currently working on. This was the state of the church until 2016. I will now tell you a little bit about the inside of the church. And every historian has a particular idea about how we should intervene in this place. But the point is that we decided to work on the olden name.
Esto es lo que se ha quedado, como habíamos visto también el año pasado, esta es una parte.
And this is what was left last year after the earthquake.
Y esto es todo lo que podemos sacar de
This is what we got from our preliminary investigation and data search in Vincoli in Rete. We are working with the Superintendent's Office of Vincunria, as well as the other offices that are taking care of the emergency response after the earthquake. Here we get information about the measurements, the registry number, as well as many other things about the movable and the fixed assets. And now if we go to the information sheets in the catalog, we get information about the vulnerability index, as well as the survey that was performed after the earthquake, because the church did not collapse during the first earthquake, it collapsed during the second earthquake, and these are very valuable data sources. Here we also have a list of the movable assets, and we can export them either to PDF or to other file formats. And this is as much as we can do with the Vincoli Rete system. Now, we need to talk about the project management strategy. This is not an intervention proposal yet, but this is what we start with. This is very precise information that we need to spend a lot of time on to see what we can do to intervene in the place. We split the debris into different areas, and this was a nightmare for archaeologists because the place was in very poor condition, and we had to work alongside engineers as well as the safety experts. And we had to opt for a very quick solution because the structure was so vulnerable that if we went in to try and recover something, the remains of the building could fall on us. Here is a provisional prevention strategy, and this is a blueprint of what is left of the church without the debris.
Esto quería decir también que es importante la interdisciplinaridad, pero también es importante saber quién toma la decisión.
An interdisciplinary approach is important, but also who makes the decision. In our country, we have a government position called the RUPTO. And the RUPTO is the project officer, and then we have the field work head, that is the one that defines what you need to do on the site as such. Our team comprises a series of experts from many fields, and based on trial and error, we have changed sometimes who is doing what. For example, there was one time when we assigned an engineer as the safety lead, but we decided that that was not the proper approach. And for example, with regards to reconstruction, we will assign as a team lead. We will assign an engineer to be the team lead, and we will work in different ways depending on the situation to define who needs to do what within the team. We have created a lot of information sheets. Here we have a lot of debris that is what remains from a piece. And here what I'm saying is that if there are certain materials that cannot be properly cared for or recovered, except with the participation of an interdisciplinary team, then we needed to have an interdisciplinary team. And for example, if I am not a restorer, I cannot tell the restorer what to do with this piece, but I can certainly tell this person what the priorities and the objectives are with regards to the intervention of this piece. And we need to do everything together. There will be times, of course, when we will do things together, but there will also be times when we need to work on our own according to our field of expertise. And now I will go very quickly through this last part of the presentation, and it sometimes looks like debris is just that, debris, but we classify the remains according to what they could possibly be. We have information sheets for everything. This looks like a very crazy job to do, and it is, but they have been very useful to identify where we found them and where they were. For example, in this case, this is on top of the choir, and this is some stonework. And we decided that we had to start with the stonework and then rebuild the rail. And that's how we started to rebuild the rail, and we were very surprised when we found out that all the pieces were there. This required a lot of patience. This is extremely time-consuming, and sometimes we feel hopeless, but we are very proud of this end result. The company that is working with us in this is putting together the remains of the saints that were painted on the murals. These paintings were inside the niches of this rail, and what we are doing right now is to see how we can put the murals or the paintings back inside the niches. Hopefully we will be able to do it in the future. And this is another picture of a piece that was completely broken down but that has been put back together. These are pictures of our Christmas Mass. And the last thing I want to mention is that our interdisciplinary job needs to use this site. This is a site that is not working so well either, I'm sorry about that, but this is a site that we can use to get all the information that's available. This is a site that we use to issue information requests, to get pictures, and many other information sources. And here, for example, we have been able to get pictures from local schools, and thank you very much for your attention. You finished just in time, so we have a time for 2 questions.
La faccio in italiano, spero che gli altri la capiscano, ovviamente. Diciamo, io da una parte, proprio come italiano, sono molto orgoglioso di come funzionano alcune delle meccaniche, quelle che ha illustrato. Per esempio, io ho vissuto un po' l'unità di crisi per motivi diversi. La protezione civile in Umbria ha funzionato magnificamente, soprattutto per i fenomeni che riguardano, cioè il terremoto non è solo il bene culturale, sono le persone, il lavoro, l'alloggio, cioè tutto questo, le strade, le infrastrutture, il fiume che sonda, cioè tutto questo insieme di attività che riguardano.
An apology from the interpreter. Currently the English booth is the only one that's active.
Però è che la finezza di questo restauro, necessaria per quell'opera, e anche il lavoro pazientissimo che è necessario attivare con tutti gli strumenti possibili per recuperare fin l'ultimo possibile frammento, e sono convinto che è giusto che lo trovi in mezzo a quei sassetti il naso del santo giusto, può essere applicato con la stessa logica alle mura di Norcia. C'è qualcosa di folle come dire, di non nell'approccio italiano, c'è qualcosa che non è graduale, non distingue più, non so come dire.
Las obras de Asís se llamaron el cantiere.
María Elena, si puedes hacer también una síntesis de la pregunta, porque no sé si todo el público puede entender.
Sí, es que es muy bueno lo que se ha hecho en la unidad de crisis, en la fase de emergencia.
So in some, the emergency response was good, but in some in Lazio as well as in the Marche. And this work looks very good, but we don't really know how to apply it in other situations. So my former director's idea, Gisela Caponi, was to launch a pilot project. First, because we have, for example, San Benedetto, but it is very complex because it is right in downtown, there are a lot of demonstrations, so we have to work in an area that is easy to control. So my former director's idea is to work with the Superintendent's Office of Umbria as well as the Special Superintendent's Office for Emergency Response to ensure that they can assist in other situations. The problem is that every restoration project is very specific. We hope that this can be applied in other situations, but this is a major challenge. And of course, there will be times when we can use what we already have. And I think that success stories are useful almost all the time. They cannot be replicated one-to-one in every case, but having, for example, a list of what the priorities are is certainly useful. And we are currently thinking about what we could do in the future with these highly vulnerable assets. And it doesn't mean that it will be used, but it could be used.
Una domanda però, prima volevo fare una piccola nota. In Colle Maggio all'Aquila è stata effettuata una ricostruzione andando a fare un'anastilosi molto dettagliata di tutti gli elementi in muratura di ogni tipo e pezzatura e il risultato è ottimale.
Sí, claro. Dice en otra iglesia de Abruzzo, otra región.
The comment is that in the Church of Abruzzo, another area that has been struck by earthquakes, there have been a lot of interventions. And it is true. Currently, our challenge is to try and then put everything back together with its original pieces.
Pero el estado de esta cosa es muy deteriorado, vamos.
Indeed, but there is a lot of damage in this case.
Sono riusciti perfino a recuperare le poligomi originali che in passato erano state perdute proprio nel recupero di tutti gli elementi originari in pietrame.
Seguro que es un ejemplo que se verá como el de Asís también.
This is an example that is will be used as in the case of Asís.
Si pone rispetto al concetto della mappatura del rischio sismico, considerando il concetto di restauro preventivo di Brandi e il concetto di Ruder introdotto da lui stesso nella teoria del restauro, che è stato derubato di tutto, di ogni valore artistico, che però tuttavia mantiene ancora la sua entità di manufatto storico originale.
No es fácil, no sé cómo se dice Ruder en español. Ruina, la ruina. La ruina se puede tranquilamente evaluar como vulnerabilidad, pero se puede utilizar.
If something is in ruins, it can immediately be considered to be highly vulnerable, but in this case we would need to draw on archaeological expertise because they have a more comprehensive approach. Of course, there are very blurry lines between archaeology and preservation and other fields of expertise, but it is definitely something that we need to consider.
Sì. Sì. Claro, vamos, yo creo que mapa de riesgo es algo muy práctico.
I believe that our risk assessment map is very practical. It is useful to measure vulnerability, but not to judge if something is a ruin or an archaeological site or something else. I would consider vulnerability to fall under the domain of archaeology because I think that they are experts in how to deal with that type of characteristic. However, the map certainly gives us a very quick calculation about the status of an asset. So what we need is then a more specific survey. Can we have the last question, please?
Para el estudio de probabilidades que se utiliza para determinar riesgos, ¿qué espectro de años se está utilizando?
What time reference are you using to measure the statistical value of the vulnerability index? I cannot really talk about statistics because that is not my domain of expertise, but we do consider the algorithm to be highly reliable because both architects as well as IT experts and engineers participated in its creation. Measuring territorial hazards is also very difficult. But in this case, we need to rely on the support from the INGV, which is an institute specialized in earthquakes. And what they do is to put certain things on the ground. I'm not an expert in this, so I am giving you a very poor description of it. But they do something to measure the real vulnerability of the soil. And that is why we are working with the INGV to obtain a more precise information. But this falls outside my field of expertise. So in sum, the point is that we need to work with a lot of institutions and also with statisticians. Thank you very much, Maria Elena, and let's give her a round of applause. We now invite Leonardo Sanchez Meza to join us here at the front to talk about the regulation of ruins within the regulations of monument preservation, critical insights into the Spanish experience.
He holds a PhD in public law by the Bologna University in Italy. His research is on the rights to culture, cultural heritage, political regimes. He is a researcher and collaborator of the ED project from the Ministry of Economy and Competitiveness, Natural Risks in Law. In the framework of these, he has been a manager and he has collaborated with public entities, highlighting his experience as a director of fixed assets, cultural heritage director in the University of Granada. He is also a member of the steering council from the international project since 2010. He is a scholar and specialized masters in the University of Granada, such as the Masters in Architectonics and Masters in Science and Cultural Heritage. He has collaborated in other universities' masters, locally and abroad, and also in prestigious centers as part of the cultural heritage in Spain. I now give you the floor. Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Culture, the INAH, the tireless INAH, and the European Union delegation for inviting me once again to this important symposium. Well, where to start? It is truly an honor, as I was saying, to be part of this exchange forum, especially for a perhaps slightly different element, which is including a jurist in this conversation. In my lecture, I am convinced that creating and analyzing good standards is not possible if we are only doing it within our reality, if we are only doing it based on our facts and issues. We need to have a multidisciplinary collaboration, which is why this type of a symposium is of a greater experience. It is a tough and fruitful knowledge exchange, specifically discussing Mexico and its seismic risks. So we are 15 minutes away from the coffee break, so I'll try to be brief, although I may not be successful. I'm sure you'll appreciate my being brief, so let me try to do so. I guess that you're doing well, you're not entirely tired. My head is entirely filled with ideas. It's just as if my kids were in school. At least in here we keep an order, but my feeling is the same. My brain is loaded in such a way that hopefully I'll be able to keep on listening throughout this day, and I wish the same for you. Today's subject is ruins regulation and ruin state. It was suggested by Mariana Coronel. She mentioned it would be interesting, and it is linked to our dynamics. Maria Elena has already discussed a prevention instrument. Now let's see what is the law reaction, connecting it to last year's talk, and how a ruin can be regulated in order to be beneficial. I'm very humble before all the experts and technicians. As a jurist, I'm here just to see what is it that the law can add as an additional instrument to this conversation. Legislation is an instrument introduced sometimes in a hostile or uncomfortable manner for professionals, since it imposes obligations. A rule of law in a democratic state obviously has an important meaning. In that sense, a society may not wish certain results from different sciences. It may have been designed to moral, social, political factors. Those determine the constraints on certain professions. Our law is seeking a concrete public interest, health, education, and a complete heritage protection due to its value for citizens, and not only for those experts that want to apply their science and seek for their truth. So that is a good balance. However, having counselors or a law expert sometimes is uncomfortable. Now, law is also an instrument for weighing interest and problem solving. Today, I mentioned that law cannot only cannot hinder a science. It should leave room so that that science can expand and grow and not smother it or leave it suffocated. Now, there are certain truths in law that science is never able to reach. Although there are certain conventions that may not be fulfilling for everyone, however, it represents a starting point. So I was about to mention two topics, but they have just been mentioned. Ruin and its concept, which is not directly addressed by law, but when intervening in law, we need to know what is the type of damage that we are working with. Now, moving on to the third item, legal aspects of ruins regulation as an asset and its state. We'll talk about the Spanish regulation and we'll compare it with the Mexican legislation to see what can be improved. And the fourth item of this talk, stemming from all the learning that has been shared in these previous hours, these are only reflections upon our discussion. So these are 4 items. I'll go fast. So I started with an introduction. Pietrillo Salvati has already explained. It was Raffaello to Leone X, or Leone X's letter. And to summarize, ruin as a concept or as a term has always been quoted in Spanish standards. Perhaps even more in its oldest legislative precedents, such as important legal corpus in the early 20th century, but the law has not defined what a ruin is. It has a concept, but not a definition. Now, in all of this analysis and slides that I will share with you, I have shared and copied some texts. Even though we don't have a definition for ruin, it is considered as a monument modality or as an element that is close to buildings and structure. So we don't have a specific concept. Our historic heritage standards have not created a conceptual definition that's specific for buildings' ruins. This is a legal fact that is now transcending. It is transcending in the sense that it's raised controversy, and I'll share with you what has been the Roman intervention. There was a trial saying that monument as a concept didn't include ruins. It only refers to buildings. So ruins should not be related to intervention criteria. And the idea was, if it is not a building, then preservation criteria will not be applied to the ruin, and therefore we are able to do our own wishes. We needed to think on different criteria ruled specifically by a legislation. Now, ruin as a concept is not relevant in law. Following the current regime and from the most current definitions of broader definitions of cultural heritage, the definition is within an archaeological asset, which is not defined by the elements that comprise it, but rather by the science, meaning archaeology. And it is defined as a special heritage within a specific regime. So there is no legal concept of a ruin, nor is it defined. We only see a definition of its inclusion amongst assets, fixed or movable, and they may be studied with the archaeological or under the archaeological methodology. Now, third item, ruin regulation as a state, not as a concept, but as its status, what is its current situation. This is relevant to law, and we need to make a distinction. In the Spanish case, urban ruins regulation, let's say a non-cultural building, what are the consequences, the legal consequences when it becomes a ruin versus a protected cultural building that becomes a ruin? the regime changes for these two situations. There are similarities, but in itself it is different. There is a certain absence in detail from the 1985 legislation, which was the state legislation, and there is now a law by region that is regulating these matters differently. In the autonomous legislation, some of these standards include ruin regulation, and there are two main interests. In order to, we first need to think about ownership. And there are also two types of ruins. And even though it does not delve into its preservation specificities, we have to highlight that the difference between an urban ruin and a historic ruin is that the historic ruin doesn't lead, or it should not automatically lead, to demolition. This is sometimes a common interest, and they say, let this building fall so that I can build in a cheaper manner, and that would be profitable. State legislation entails a preservation law. Historic assets will need to be preserved, safeguarded by its owners. So if the building collapses or is deteriorated, it's me, the one that has to pay for it. That is the article's reading, but it is tremendously demanding. So doctrine and jurisprudence of judges diminished that obligation, which represented an excessive load on private owners specifically. That ruin regulation is a bit more demanding than the urban, than for the urban ruins. So ruin files regulation, there are several procedures, and it depends upon two authorities. This is usually one issue. Town halls are the ones, meaning that the local entity is the one working with the legal procedures, but they need to let the Ministry of Culture or a regional Office of Culture of these matters so that they are aware of it and so that they grant authorization. So first, notification needs to be sent on that ruin file, and even if that ruin is declared a ruin, if it will be demolished, then a second authorization is needed. So an asset entitled as a ruin is not entirely accepted with its demolition. So they would need to see, in here it's not an option to see if it is refurbished or demolished, the parts that are remaining. Now, if an asset becomes a ruin, the cultural administration may stop the urban ruin and its project so that it is declared big. Some common aspects: once a ruin is declared a ruin, we've said that we need a manifestation of authorization. It cannot be demolished, it is treated exceptionally, and if it is accepted as a ruin, then if it is a private asset, it may go into the hands of the state, and there are also fines within administrative penalties. So the ruin and its procedure until we demolish it, as I said, there are several steps to be followed, and the cultural administration needs to be on top of it, meaning that if it will be demolished, they need to remove the cultural interest asset. so that we know that it is no longer of value. There are also very strict records that need to be written related to the ruin. There are Spanish regional constitutional legislations, and they say that the aim is preserving the asset, not demolishing it. We should also give a hearing to the town hall, the owners, and there should be a record defining these assets' value, the technical and economic possibility of its refurbishment. Some other standards demand a clear determination of its demolishing process. As we said, ruin within protection of cultural heritage does not mean that it cannot be refurbished. Now, in Spanish regional constitutional communities, and in the constitutional law, we need to limit preservation duties of the owners, which will include an economic measure. That's the first type of a ruin included within historic buildings. Now, what are the consequences? What are the obligations in preserving the ruin? Well, it is an economic estimate. 50% of the current assets if a historic building has been damaged, when recovering it, we may quantify damages in order to know how much it would, what an amount would be in order to rebuild that structure, and also the amount that the owner needs to provide. It is still a load, but not the entirety. The rest is in the hands of the community, of the autonomous community. If not, the building would be demolished, but in the meantime, the owner is the one in charge and mandated to refurbish it. There are other criteria for asset value calculation, and you will see it in the urban law. And there's also reference to for owners not to pay for the 100% of the amount. That would not be in place if it was caused by that owner, which is another speculation, meaning that if that person didn't care for the building or didn't look after it, then in those cases they are not able to access the 50% for the economic fees, and they would need to pay for the full amount. So the legal ruin, it may be declared when intervention costs are below the 50% than the total amount of its reconstruction. Now, there are certain differences with the urban ruin. And those are that to make those calculations, there are some minor aspects. If the building is older, then it is given less value, and the amount of money that the owner needs to give is less. But if we're talking about cultural assets, then those aspects are not included. In fact, some legislations include coefficients of a greater aspect, meaning that if the asset is older, then it will cost more. It's opposite to what people think. If it's old, then it loses value. But in cultural assets, it's the opposite. Your ruin, your urban ruin, is different than the cultural ruin. So in those cases, we always seek preservation instead of demolition. Not to lag behind, I'll skip through this. Now there's another regulated ruin, which is the non-recoverable ruin. This is not related to economic factors. It relates to material damages suffered by the building, meaning that it is under a real danger for people and things. The criterion would be a 50% of damaged non-recoverable goods, and obviously that people and their items are not safe. And as is explained in this chart, the legislation includes, the Spanish regional constitutional legislation includes more signals when not to demolish. If this is a ruin declared non-recoverable, then they need to do its previous value, and if interventions need to take place, partial or emergent, then we always need the Administration of Culture's intervention. Some legislations even include unusual, very short periods of time, and they say, if I am to ensure or protect these assets, then according to the Castilla de la Mancha legislation, I need to do it in a less than a 24-hour time period. In the Castilla, you're given with 72 hours, but if it is an emergency, you're not able to do anything without the INAH. And this is very complicated since town halls sometimes are not working well. I didn't bring pictures with me, but there has been a recent case in Granada where a 2016 building facade, it was one of the very few painted on an outer stucco, and it fell to the street. It is one of the most common streets. It has passers-by who are going to monuments. Firefighters came in, and the solution was just removing the rest of the stucco where paintings were on. And we're still waiting for information on what has happened. Did the town hall grant permission, or at any point in time the Cultural Council was it aware of the situation? Sometimes it is out of our hands and it does not receive an adequate treatment. There are other references, but I'll leave them for a further debate, if possible. And the ruin regime and its state. There are additional legislations to stop those speculations whenever a building seems to be about to fall. Sometimes they say, oh, let's remove this old building in order to favor the urban business and the market. There are restrictions in the Canarian law where buildings declared as ruins need to follow after criteria. It needs to be legally or physically. In case of a demolishment, it needs to be documented. It is expressly stated in the legislation in Basque and in Murcia. In case the building was demolished. If I have demolished a two-level historic building, then the business cannot construct a four-level building. So this is another stoppage to speculation. Buildings that will replace demolished structures in protected surrounded areas need to remain with the same typology. It's not to create falls, but rather to create constructive types that will remain with the same image of that landscape and of the set. Last year I spoke about reconstruction criteria, which says that ruined assets may receive interventions, but we seek to recovering their volume. And this is the last part of my intervention. I've been speaking for 25 minutes, so I will remain in time. These are only 4 reflections that have came to mind, and this I just summarized it after our days of work. The first is from a reality that is appealing, and I'd like to open the floor. Let's open a debate for you. So we've seen how they are regulated. We saw it last year for fixed assets. Well, Spanish legislations have started making a distinction between fixed assets. They now include paintings. So we see that the law is now delving into details. They now explain how intervention needs to happen in both fixed and movable assets. Now, within movable assets, we never see a distinction between how to treat archaeological ruins. I'm going once again back to the concept of the archaeological ruin. And specific criteria are not in place. In fact, the Castilla de la Mancha legislation includes all the different actions, but it doesn't cite the preservation one. I think it was a mistake. It's not prohibiting it, but it seems as if preservation was not there. And there are a series of questions. Not making a distinction between intervention criteria, meaning ruined archaeological assets, international agreements, treatments. Well, they are now adding specific criteria to this matter. However, our legislation does not include them. Due to the original confusion in Spain, because they treated ruins and buildings alike, as if they were in the same category. And I am concerned about the uses. Refurbishing a, let's say, live building with a pre-existing use versus one that does not have a use is not the same. And it's a terrible preservation status. And there is some emphasis in some of our legislations on the minimum intervention principle. They say that that's the starting point. And that's if we're talking about an archaeological asset. Archaeological ruins are a special heritage. They deserve different treatment. Nevertheless, we apply the same intervention criteria that we would use for a more modern, though culture ruin. An asset. So archaeological ruins are treated just as the rest of the cultural assets, which is concerning to my eye. So what are the criteria applied to non-archaeological assets? We need to to know what those are, what is the margin left in Spain in order to do appropriate interventions to these archaeological ruins. And we may classify in three forms. Due to modifications in the law, we now are able to work on preservation or refurbishment or consolidation of archaeological ruins. This criteria, we looked at it last year, and it is about the possibility of reconstructing with a knowledge on that asset, the possibility of doing a neutral intervention, volume reconstruction, and comprehensive reconstruction, where we included even earthquakes and natural catastrophes. So, reconstructing a ruin legally is possible, but technically speaking, you're the ones to tell. Now, other Spanish regional constitutional laws are more difficult, and they wouldn't allow the preservation or refurbishment of an archaeological ruin. And the priority of this minimum intervention in Castilla-La Mancha or the Madrid just been reformed law. Some criteria do not allow intervention to archaeological ruins with current parameters, but we see the material compatibility that we've heard of these days, and one that's rarely established in the laws is materials that are previously tested and its application, meaning that I cannot intervene by using experimental materials. I cannot experiment with them. And in the case of an earthquake, how could I be able to test? We were talking about carbon fibers. Scientifically speaking, we're seeing if we use them or not. But if in the law it says that I need to wait until there's an earthquake to see if I can use it, it is up to the judges. Tested may refer to a lab test, but defining what is its predictability and how it will react, we cannot know it. If the technicians cannot know it, less the lawyers. And reversibility, which is not always feasible. This is a picture because, believe me, not only architects and archaeologists share pictures. I will not make a comment on them, but these are interventions done in Spain on archaeological ruins or in the state of a ruin, attesting to the fact that our legislation gives room for different types of interventions. More experimental preservationists, well, you see what is the value of these assets. This is the Matrera Castle. It was private initiative work, and most of the works seen on the screen are done on public heritage in. But when it is a public initiative, then culture is tighter, and they don't leave so much room for experiments. So this is the Matrera Castle. You'd be able to make comments on them, not I. These are integration examples. Completing missing parts in order to give a good reading of this landscape. As Paco Jurado was saying in the early 80s, this is in the St. Francis Convent, and he will be taking the floor on the archaeological remains in the synagogue. This is respecting archaeological remains, not touching them. This is working on a monument but using modern language. These others have been more polemic, This is, for instance, in Hyena, this is an Arab construction, and we see even a people demonstration. It was very popular, and there have been even material compatibility issues because rainwater damages, or not damages, but changes the color of these walls. And they said that it would respect the compatibility of these materials. Another case is the granite wall, always respecting the remains. These others are also very controversial, which were even taken to the Supreme Court. And it is about the integration and reconstruction of the cloister of the Jerónimo in Madrid within El Prado works. They were extending El Prado, and the cloister was removed and reinstalled by architect Rafael. And this is a basic case, a Roman theater. Look at the law and its flexibility. They allowed the construction of a new work on an archaeological asset, which in many aspects, for some theorists, may be a subject of debate. But this is a theater adaptation to a public use that had already existed. And we can talk about the lack of authenticity, or the so-called lack of authenticity of this, which required more intervention. So what else? What other ideas would I like to share with you as my closing points?
No estoy consiguiendo lo que quería, pero bueno. La compatibilidad de los usos es otro tema que me preocupa, puesto que
it's concerning,
la diferenciación no es lo mismo asignar un uso a un edificio
it's not the
vivo que
same
adquirir un uso
giving a
permanente,
use to
y
a
por
live
eso también es
building that has
complejo,
already been used, and it's complex. For instance, in the Sabunto case, we need to respect cultural values, and as appointing a new use, the law says that that use always needs to be compatible to the values that were initially given to the asset. I only have 2 more slides to share. This is a very short lesson on administrative law. Some of the most annoying factors for technicians are when restoration works end up in trials, and sometimes due to it could be due to a Ministry of Culture comment or due to an error. That is non-desirable, and it is the last law line that we would want to see. Sometimes it's inevitable. Intervention may happen, since technicians may say, but judges are not familiar with architecture. Why will you place my work in trial if you're not familiar with the subject? Now, in regulated acts, judges need to prove if that intervention happened or not, to see if administration reacted adequately and granted a permit. The use needs to be compatible with the assets' values, and we may hear different opinions if we open up the floor, but that does not mean that judges cannot have control. So that is the potential legal solutions. One is being respectful to the asset, yes or no. The discretionary action implies if it is settled, then the solution would be the Y2, and there is no other potential solution. But if we're talking about discretionary action within potential solutions, then I am offered with several options. When the administration authorizes or grants authorization, they need to say the criteria that needs to be adopted is this one. However, legally speaking, a process would need to take place regarding what is the aim. That may be analyzed by the judge in the discretionary action. We need to explain why have we chosen it and why have we left aside the other ones. That is major to judges to see that there is no arbitrary decision. And that's how they would say approved. And if you're not able to do so, then judges will say that it was arbitrary. And sometimes they say, okay, you explain why you're using the glass, but you're not saying why you didn't use wood or carbon fiber. And then comes a technician attesting that glass is mistaken, it should not be used, and it includes more arguments and mandates. But for a judge, that's reason enough to mention that the use of glass was not legally, or it was its use would have no reason or no value. And some technicians say, oh, this is enough, and we do not even need to keep on explaining the rest. And last, at last is the idea that came with Professor Francis Job. Spain has a regulatory model thinking that heritage is protected by institutions and by law, that citizens appreciate assets. Archaeological ruins, let's not leave this aside. Citizens didn't even know them. But the process in here seems to be the opposite. Institutions work on them due to archaeologists' appreciation, not due to the citizens' value. But the process needs to be the opposite. We should connect the people with the heritage. In the Totolapan case, for instance, not Totolapan, in the Santiago church, with the Chachihuites case, the population cared about the hermitage. They didn't care about the building. And that was enormously transcendental, archaeologically speaking. So we need to work in the reverse. And my conclusion, a ruin is not a legal concept. It has not been delved into in law. But a ruin regulation needs to be different. We need to make a distinction between urban ruins so that owners are not loaded with the 100% of the amount. If it is a public asset, then there should be public assistance for its payment. And if it will be demolished, it is not automatic. The legal system actually seeks other options before demolition. Last but not least, the reflection for us to open up the floor. The lack of accuracy on criteria, on the intervention on archaeological ruins. Allow me to thank once again everyone. Thank you for the experience. And I was saying with Professor Job, it's been touching for me to see a legal ruin, seeing the local and popular awareness among Mexicans and the relationship with heritage has been impressive for me. He's a teacher. He was using the bells and with the kids, and I asked the kids, will you use the bells tomorrow? And they said, yes, we will. Anyhow, thank you and enjoy your coffee. Thank you. Before our coffee break, we have time for 2 questions and then we'll share a notice. Thank you. I thank Dr. Sanchez Mesa. This conference is tremendously rich And it makes me think of some aspects that we should think of in the Mexican regulation, obviously thinking on cultural heritage and to stop speculation. So first of all, how could we legally include the concept of ruin? It's currently in the hands of civil protection, and it's usually they say you can declare it a ruin. As you say, it can be declared non-recoverable or imminent. And there were dreadful situations in the earthquake. Civil protection, as a safety measure, demolished the access arches to the Xochimilco construction. There is a video where we see where the atrium was demolished, and it was part of the damage diagnosis at that time. And other factors were included. We held a workshop with the French mission, and we noticed that people cared. They were safeguarding those pieces, and we are able to do an intervention project. So this leads me to my second comment. We need to work hand in hand, interdisciplinary, with civil protection. It shouldn't only be an expertise, as related to Maria Elena Corrado's presentation. This shouldn't only be a state security measures. Rather, keeping a structure safe should be done also in the hands of experts, with a group of experts. And my third is a comment and question. We are currently working with refurbishment projects in Mexico, and I'd like to know, are there any criteria in place in Spain so that spaces that were not in use may be recovered? For instance, open Mexican chapels. Some of them were abandoned or just left aside. And there may be other concepts included, such as authenticity. So I'd like to know, have you experienced this situation? If so, what have you done about it? Thank you. Thank you, Mariana, for your question. In the light of the regulation, well, these are left to the administration in its decision, in its discretionary action. The changes in use are left solely to the discretionary action of the state. Now, what are the elements assessed in order to see if the use will be authorized or not? There should also be compatible uses to the asset's nature that made that asset a cultural one. In administrative procedures, when authorizing use, it should be thought of. It needs to say, okay, this is a recovered use, or this is an entirely new use, but it is not in conflict with the religious asset and its features, but it will depend upon good technicians, experts, and religious people. Otherwise, there will be claims saying that the asset use is not correct, and a judge may even work on the case to see what is the aim or what is the goal of this asset. Formal criteria within the legislation, we do not have them. Only the cases that I've explained. Thank you. Law and its intervention is hostile and uncomfortable for technicians and scientists. That's what you said, and I agree with you. However,
también mencionaba que el objetivo
It's
es
necessary. And you also said that our concern is putting interest in order.
Creo que las cosas han estado cambiando.
Now, I think that things have changed. Humankind development, law has always been, it has happened after events, but now it's happening at the same rate or pace. So your analysis on the situation is excellent, just as it was last year. So I'd like to know, should we include within these two objectives one more, the one that provokes definitions, analysis, and technical work? By listening to this legal approach of the work that we do, I am now technically concerned. This legal analysis creates a technical aspects review. So my question would be, are you aware of what you're provoking here, or of the consequences of it? I do not know what the effects will be, but I can tell you right now that I love to be a provoker. So you're right. I always share exaggerated or violent examples to my students. For instance, if a geneticist can do wonders with the DNA, we may now have organs and limbs that we wouldn't have. But that's something that society is against. They're against it, and it's their right. And it happens just as in any other field. A Spanish architect used to say, on the theater, on the Roman theater, they were saying, if an architect is working on a ruin, he or she needs to understand that it is addressing a true challenge. But as a citizen and as a jurist, it is a technical challenge. But what about the social challenge? And that is what that ruin brings to you, to your mind. And society, as legislation says, society basically owns or is the holder of that heritage. There is identity within, which is why this profession that used to be freely exercised is now largely constrained. The wise people were the ones handling that material, but nowadays society is the one handling it. And as you say, well, that's why technicians are now thinking, should we create different technicals or other aspects in order to change their scientific decision making? It is inevitable, and law should contribute to it, not stop it or petrify it, which is why I think law intervening is adequate. Law needs to adapt and to leave room to science for growth, so that we are given with truth, and then we will be able to weigh them in accordance to the heritage wishes or the people's wishes of that heritage and of that building, but we cannot be end to end. And if it is a heritage intervention, we cannot also create a committee for citizens to decide, otherwise we would lose some tremendously important historic documents. So we need to find balance between social awareness and scientific knowledge. I'll try to be short. Dissemination and information on heritage is fundamental. We need to share what a ruin is. But penalties are also necessary. I clearly saw the different motives, but if a demolition happens deliberately, then you may have it and it may be a long explanation, but sometimes we don't have a clear idea on what are the type of penalties that we should impose on those cases. Because without penalties, people conduct those freely. Well, in Spain we have severe economic penalties, but criminal penalties, they are very soft. So it can be left as an administrative penalty, and the consequence will be an economic fee. And in some other cases, you may not exercise your own profession, and some other measure is repairing damage produced, paid by the one who generated this damage. But we're talking about very expensive penalties. It was 250,000 euros in Andalusia. So these are calculated in accordance to the asset's value, but it is impossible to value them. Now, if this is a very severe damage, then we go to the criminal code, where there is a penalty on cultural damages, but the largest, worst penalty that you have is 3 years in prison. If you receive less than 2 years in prison, then you don't even go to prison. If it is an architect's mistake or a misdoing of a public official, for instance, these penalties will not be, they won't take the individual to the prison. So criminal threat is not truly in place. I think that penalties need to be given with different degrees. And the last question.
Sobre lo que comentaba, creo que mucho tiene que ver también con esta otra parte de tanto de los derechos humanos fundamentales que interesan.
I think this is related to, yes, human rights, cultural rights, and these intangible asset heritage. How can I preserve a church if I no longer have certain parts of it? I remember the Cupinchen map. It was a mapping where we see sites, and most of the hills that were a reference of them, they are now being used for raw material extraction. So we have misabused our heritage. As an architect, I am working, but for whom? That heritage is for whom? I am here for someone else. Whenever I reach a community, I have to interpret what is it that they are saying, what is their meaning. And I also need to transfer the public interest behind that heritage preservation. If there are collapsed elements, then why I need to explain why reconstruction will not happen, since it is vital for that society. Mexico is a cultural mosaic. Each individual owns heritage in a certain way. So there may be ruins, but that single stone is a witness of our past or of that person's past. Some communities, such as the Huicholes, they travel all throughout the Mexican territory in order to get to a site that's only a hill or that it only has a stone. So the value and that this heritage entails is sometimes in dimensions that are beyond the asset as an object. The asset may be the continent of different heritage, but it's also its foundation. It is the reason behind that heritage. So what happens with these cultural rights? Or in Japan, for instance, when so many buildings are refurbished but the knowledge is kept, what happens if that population suffers from some harm? Are they trained even
Ese sería como un
if there is no architect around. Thank you, that's my main concern. Wow, that is quite a concern. It's just we cannot prevent it. It is self-criticism, it may or may not be shared. I'm always open to debate or open up to it. And in Europe, even though we're trying to be sensitive to social values, but we are working with centuries of experience where public concern and the branches concern has always been elitist. It's been about the kings or the noble people. It's been about art, owners and proprietors. So our standards have followed this type of a vision in terms of who controls and who knows about the heritage. Some most current dynamics that are no longer elite, for instance, the World Heritage Convention, they have their own asset declaration, and they do it with population interviews. But in our case, we don't have those. Technicians are the ones assessing, and if a population is requesting that access, then they may give it to it. But it is not foreseen in our legislations. However, in the World Heritage Conservation, then it is included in order to see what is the person's and the society's perception on that heritage. So it is a change in models, and it is a very healthy challenge, not only thinking about which community owns that heritage, but we also need to think about the people that haven't even born yet. We are the ones thinking about it, and we need to be aware of our future and what we're leaving behind for others. I know that there are many more questions, but we are already 40 minutes behind the agenda, so if during the coffee break you have specific questions, please think of them. And I'd like to thank Leonardo, and if you could please